here. Hello, this is the Coaching Hour, brought to you in proud partnership with Coaches Network South Africa. I'm Paul Rotherham. Welcome to another edition. Mary and Mareka join me as always. And Mareka, I think this today, a conversation that is long overdue. What are we chatting about today?
Absolutely. It's such a pleasure to have Nikki Edwards with us today, Paul. She's a trauma-informed systemic wellness practitioner, master accredited master coach, and specialist addiction counselor. And her work and lived experience honors both modern neurobiology and ancient relational wisdom. Welcome, Nikki. It's very nice to have you finally on the Coaching Hour.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. I'm honored.
Awesome. Today, we're going to talk about what a recovery coach does. And this is the very first time that we are having this conversation on the Coaching Hour about addiction recovery. But before we get into the topic, Nikki, tell us a bit about yourself and how you got on this journey being a recovery coach.
Sure. It's a bit of a long story. But I myself am in recovery. I've actually just hit 10 years in sobriety. So my journey started, the progression into addiction started when I was very young. I was around 13 years old when I started using substances. Obviously, it's the usual alcohol, and then progression onto marijuana, and then progression onto all the hard substances. So from about 13 years old, I was kind of on that road and on that train already. And it took me a long time, various different interesting experiences in my life. It took me to some really dark places, but it also took me to some really interesting and exciting places. So it's about 20 years I was battling and struggling with substance use, and also obviously my mental health, because the two go hand in hand. And then, it was when I was around about 29 years old that I started thinking, okay, my addiction took me to a really, really dark place, and I realized I had to do something about it. And then I started my recovery process. And it took me quite a while after that, 6 rehabs later, counseling, therapy, all of that. And then my last rehab, it was 10 years ago. That was when I decided, okay, well, I'd made the decision and this was it. And that's when I really actually, my substance use stopped. And from then on, it's just really about managing my own mental health. And then I've spent the last 10 years training myself up, upskilling myself, and it wasn't really actually a choice that I decided to go into, the mental health or, substance use industry. It was more of a calling, a vocation, because of everything that I've experienced before in my past. I had, really in-depth, insightful, about addiction and my own lived experience. It does really help in terms of helping others, spreading the message in recovery and being able to manage our emotions, our bodies, our minds in a more effective and productive way. So that is what I've been doing the last 10 years. And now I support many people internationally. I consult with many different rehabs on an international scale. I also have my own practice. I've actually really found meaning and purpose in my life. And this is what I'm meant to do. And so it's something that I love. It's something that is very necessary, especially in the world today. And I'm just grateful. I'm grateful that I get the opportunity to walk with people through their recovery. And it's not only about substance, it's really any sort of recovery. Because we all go through trials and tribulations, adversity in our lives, and we all need somebody to help us and support us, and maybe be like a signpost or a mirror, just to help us move forward in our lives.
I'm sure we're going to get onto the specifics of what makes addiction during
Yes.
this chat, but I want to jump in straight away, if I may, with a question, because in your first few sentences, you alluded to the fact that I think you used the word obviously, and you said, I was an alcoholic, and then obviously I moved on to marijuana and drugs and so forth. And that for me, I found a bit of a shock because I don't drink. Firstly, I've tried drugs a handful of times in my life and haven't enjoyed the experience. But you make it sound as if one automatically leads to the other. Is that the case?
No, no. Sorry that was interpreted that way, but it's actually not the case at all, because addiction really doesn't have anything to do with the substance. It's really not about the alcohol or the drugs that actually leads to addiction. Yes, there is a part to play in it in terms of chemical dependency because of what's the substances hold. It's how it interacts with your body and your brain and the brain chemistry that actually creates the addiction. Addiction is not about substance, and I really need to highlight that. Not everybody who drinks or uses substances becomes addicted. There are most people will go through a period of experimental process where they might smoke weed, or they might, drink alcohol. They might take some, drugs here and there. But not many actually do become dependent or addicted to the substance.
Can we
So
get straight?
when I said, sorry.
Sorry, can we get straight into that then? What is addiction? Define
So
addiction.
in scientific terms, addiction is constant repetitive behavior, repeated over time, with the negative consequences, and a person is not able to stop. So addiction itself is not actually about the substance. Somebody could get addicted to many things. They could get addicted to technology, which we had a conversation just now about. Cell phones is huge. Sex, exercise, relationships, addicted to a person. It's all, any people, place, and things you could get addicted to. So it's not really about the substance itself. It's how that, how it impacts you on an internal level, and what happens in the brain when you actually become attached to something. So, yes.
Nikki, is it true to say, this is the way I understand it, because I've had experiences with some family members, that have been victims of this kind of behavior. And from my experience, as rightly as you said, it's not the addiction, it's what is underlying cause that causes the addiction. It's the trauma that a person undergoes, and that causes pain, emotional pain, and then they get offered something to stop the pain. And then that's what causes the addiction, because the pain goes away when they have this substance. Then the chemical in the brain and all that kicks in. Is that true?
Yes, yes. What also we need to understand is that there's a reason why there is no cure for addiction. There's lots of different methodologies and methods and treatments out there. Nobody can come to a specific, okay, this is the process, this is the cure of addiction, because it is multifaceted. It is very complex. You can get psychologically addicted, you can get physiologically addicted, you can get intellectually addicted. There are various different forms, should I say, of addiction. So when you're treating it, you can't just say, okay, well, this is the process, because it's very client-centered. It really depends on what the client's history, culture, structure, experience will determine the treatment plan. So you're very right in terms of it starts before they even pick up, a lot of the time, and most of the time, it's actually adverse childhood experiences. If somebody's experienced trauma, Also, if somebody has a mental health disorder and it's undiagnosed, then that also is a something that we have to look at. It runs in the family too, so that is also something that we have to look at. Like, we look at the family lineage and we see, what's going on within the family history that might be lead to somebody to be predisposed to addiction. So there's all these different layers and, these parts that we have to look at in terms of, is the person really addicted? Number one, because that is a whole thing. There's a lot of people who are sitting in treatment that are not actually even addicted, truly addicted. They might be using, or they might be abusing, or they might be, but what we also look at is whether the person's behavior is impacting their immediate environment or their workplace, or, the relationships that they have. So it's very complex. It's not just as simple as, okay, the substance use or whatever. Many people will go through a period where they will drink too much because they might be, they might have gotten retrenched, or they're going through a breakup, or, something's happening in their lives and they just need some sort of a, it's self-soothing, or they need, self-medication.
A dummy.
Yeah, just to get them through the day. It does not mean to say that they're addicted. They could just be abusing it. Yes, there is definitely a chance that it could progress to addiction, but there is that continuum that we have to look at in order to make make a correct diagnosis, or to make a correct treatment plan. Yeah.
Hi,
Does
I'm
that
Paul.
answer your question?
Does that answer your question, Mary?
Yes. No, that's absolutely on par. That's 100%.
Great. Okay.
I was going to say, Nikki, hi, I'm Paul and I'm an alcoholic is probably one of the most frequently used lines if addiction is depicted. And for clarity, I'm not an alcoholic. I think I probably drink 3 drinks a year.
You're a tea-holic.
Just in case you caught, yes, I love my tea. Just in case you caught that part of the podcast and you're thinking, what? Paul's an alcoholic. How did I know? I might be a Lego-holic and a running-holic. Simple question, and I don't know if there is a quick answer, because as you said, this is a complex issue. How do I know if I'm addicted?
Okay.
Is there a way that I can say, sure, and whatever it might be, alcohol, drugs, sex, work, a cell phone, walking the dog. I mean, I don't know, that's probably an extreme example, but how do I know? What's the quick litmus test for, am I addicted?
Okay, so first of all, I just want to say that I'm an alcoholic as a 12-step fellowship thing. It's not everybody. Like, I do not identify as an alcoholic, and I do not identify as a drug addict. That's long time gone with me. And I just wanted to highlight that there's some modalities that, you will say that, but in my environments, we don't actually identify as that at all.
I agree, 100%.
Yeah. But to answer your question, Paul, how do we know that we're addicted? Okay, well, the number one thing that we look at is, can the person stop? Can the person stop doing what they're doing, whether it's the substance or the behavior? How much of this substance or behavior is impacting their everyday life? So if they're consumed by it, if it's impacting their work, their relationships, how they're showing up in life, those are indicators. Craving is also a big thing. It's also number 3, one of the number one indicators of whether you're addicted or not is whether you get cravings. So you crave, and we're not just talking about physiological craving, like if somebody is on heroin or opiates or alcohol, you get a physiological craving for it, where you get the anxiety and the sweaty palms and all of that. But you also get psychological cravings too. So somebody with a process addiction like sex or food or, tech, they will get the cravings where they become irritable and angry. Their moods are very erratic. So, I mean, this is basically describing the human condition, but in the extreme. So, we all get mood swings. We all have, okay, we feel like a chocolate or something like that. But it's more in the extreme. So it really does have a massive impact on somebody's, life, somebody's mental state, somebody's physiological state. And also like if somebody starts isolating, if they start getting withdrawn, if they're not showing their usual character, then we kind of think, okay, well, you are seriously needing some help or support here. Yeah.
Now, just to, I'm going to try and simplify it if it's at all possible. If we
Sure.
can explain, you mentioned the chemicals in our brain. If, what happens in the brain. I'm going to use a cell phone as an example because, there's many extreme, addictions. I am of the opinion that I think most people are addicted to checking their phones, whether you would like to admit it or not. If you had to count how many times you actually check your phone, you will be very surprised. So what happens in the brain? What makes a person to check their phone? Because it's such a unconscious habit that eventually, happens, that you feel kind of lost if you don't have your phone with you, or you take your phone in your own home, you drag it along with you everywhere you go. But anyway, what's the chemical thing that happens in the brain? If you can maybe just explain that.
Sure. Okay. So again, when we're talking about the chemical dependency, okay, what we really look at is dopamine. Yeah.
Yes.
So when we're constantly doing something, because it's ritualistic, it's habitual. So obviously we're like checking our phones all the time, and we're and especially cell phones and computers and games are designed to get the brain and the neurons firing in a specific way. And then dopamine is secreted into the brain. And the more dopamine that's secreted in the brain, because it is part of the reward system, we get like this feeling of, and we get a nice, like, okay, this is great. We feel okay. We feel excited, all of that stuff. So, addiction is definitely linked to the reward system and dopamine. But like I said, again, we need dopamine. Dopamine is something that we need. Otherwise, we wouldn't get out of bed in the morning. So we've got to be careful of like blaming it on dopamine. It's really kind of, again, multifaceted. It's got to do with the sensors, like cell phones, the way that the games are designed, lots of colors, lots of flashing lights, lots of stimuli. And then that gets, we have visual input as well as auditory input, which really kind of excites the brain, gets the brain going, and we release dopamine and give that feeling of, wow, okay. And then what happens is that we have a dopamine spike. And then when we stop using, then the dopamine we go into a crash. So what's really happening is everybody's got like a baseline neurochemistry, okay? Our chemical makeup, we all have a baseline. And again, it depends on the clients, what kind of baseline they will have, depending on their childhood. Like if you were grown up in a very chaotic environment, you would have a different baseline to somebody that was grown up in a very calm, secure environment. So it really depends also on the person's baseline that will determine the release of dopamine, because some people are desensitized. And the thing is, we are adaptive human beings. Our brains adapt to our environment. Our brains adapt to what's going on. So if we're sitting in front of the cell phone, for instance, and we're scrolling all the time, we're getting flippant dopamine hits left, right, and center. Then when we stop doing that, the dopamine decreases. So then we get a dopamine deficiency. And then we're not feeling great, and we're feeling depressed, and we're feeling whatever. Then we want to feel okay again. So we pick up the phone and we scroll through. And if we get a like, then again, we get a dopamine spike. And this carries on. So we're up and down, in layman's terms. If are you
Very
following?
Simplified. Yes.
Yeah. Okay. So
Nikki, but
yeah.
sorry. Is there a difference if someone's like me now? I'm using my phone for business. I use it for my emails. I use it for my communication with my team leaders and my team, and with the my system. I use it for work.
Mm.
But then it's a tool, Mary, and it's not something that you are using to give you that dopamine hit, because I
Yeah.
might be wrong, but when you open your phone and see an email from a colleague, it's there to address a specific purpose. It's not there to necessarily make you feel good. Where I
Yeah.
think my understanding of what Nikki's saying is, you would generally, let's take the average teenager who's on Instagram, TikTok, sorry, probably not Facebook and whatever other platforms they're on. And I see it with my daughter, she's 19. Every single time she uses her device, I can see by her behavior, her expression, her energy level, that she gets something out of it. She gets a kick out of, oh, look at this, oh, look at that. And the other thing that I've seen happening is the time spent on each of these is becoming less and less, but the content uptake is increasing. It's just there's less time, so she will very quickly go from scrolling on TikTok, 2 or 3 minutes, and then boom, off onto Instagram, and then back onto WhatsApp, and the attention span for each really is limited. Where I think those of us who are here now, we sort of all professionals and adults, and we use our phones and our computers for business. We can quite happily sit and go through our emails for an hour and a half, and just work through the list, or go on to whatever the business tools we are using. And generally, those things don't give us a hit. Well, I don't get a hit from checking my emails. Sometimes it would be nice if I could, but I don't. Would I be correct in that assumption, Nikki?
Again, it's very complex. It's all very depending on the client. So, for instance, somebody who's got who's a workaholic, all right, will get a different kind of experience when they are, checking emails. So, workaholism, they'll sit for hours and hours and hours, just work, because they are doing something, they're getting a payoff out of it. And a lot of the workaholics are actually avoiding. They're avoiding their emotions. They're avoiding their feelings. They don't want to go into the body because, there's too much intensity, and they don't have the tools to be able to regulate themselves. So they are using it with a different intention, like you said, Paul. So it really depends on what the person is using the device or substance or anything for. And very rightly say what you said around the quick, scrolling on TikTok and then going to Facebook. They're seeking that. They're seeking it. They're seeking the feel good. They're seeking that dopamine, even though they're not actually seeking the dopamine, because the reality is you can't get addicted to dopamine. That's not what it's about. Addiction is not dopamine. The behavior you can get addicted to, the constant repetitive, habitual behavior. And then you get desensitized to that, because on a science level, when there's so much dopamine being secreted into the brain, okay, then it's like the brain needs to kind of deal with that and be able to regulate itself. So that's why we have all those other neurotransmitters like serotonin, oxytocin, and, endorphins. It's a very complex kind of regulating machine, if you want to put it that way. But too much dopamine or too much serotonin or too much oxytocin or whatever it is actually not a healthy thing, because then the brain can't regulate itself and it cannot reach what we call homeostasis or baseline. So the more we're doing something, the more we're wanting to feel good, the more dopamine that's being secreted into the brain, the more difficult it is for the brain to actually regulate itself. Yeah. And then you've got this, overflow of dopamine, and it's trapped in the brain, and there's not enough, or for instance, certain substances will block the filtering out of the dopamine, and then you will get this kind of tolerance developing, and then you will need to use more and more and more in order to get the same effect. And that happens with cell phones. It happens with, pornography. Anything, exercise. You need more and more and more of it. And then you also need to get more riskier and riskier behavior in order to feel the same effect. That makes sense. So the algorithms on Facebook and Twitter, Instagram and all of that are designed that way. They will map you, and then they will keep putting out content that is, giving you that same feeling, that same effect. It's designed that way. These things are designed to keep you addicted. That's why you have algorithms. That's why when you go onto Facebook, then the next minute you're just seeing all of those posts of what you've just seen. And the dangers there is that, okay, one day you might be looking at, somebody talking, like a woman talking on, and the next minute you find her attractive or whatever. So you search that, and then they get more and more algorithms like that. You build more and more tolerance because it's not giving you the same effect. The next minute you're going onto porn sites. The next minute you are, going onto chat rooms. The next minute you are always looking for that extra.
It sounds to me,
making sense.
Nikki,
Yeah.
you are making sense. And it sounds to me as if we're living in an age where the addictions are far easier to access than they ever have been. Because if I look, for instance, at what I'm in my 50s now, early 50s, if I just think about technology and how long it's been around, let's say 25, 30 years. So a 20-year-old 30 years ago and a 20-year-old now, if I look at what they are able to access in terms of tech, how were we getting our kicks previously, before technology? I mean, would it literally be climbing trees and riding our bicycles during the school holidays? How were we getting those good endorphins and those great feelings? Because ultimately the nature of man hasn't changed.
I can
What's
tell.
that, Mum?
It was through soapies.
Soapies, yeah.
But even
totally.
But even television, I mean, my point is that there will always be something new, and we don't know what the next thing is going to be. AI at the moment is becoming a massive component of our lives. But let's even go back then to when Mary was a teenager, when there was very little, if no, television. What is it in man that was giving those great feelings then? Because there must have been something. We didn't just wake up in the 80s and go, oh, I need to feel good. That's in our nature to need those kicks and feel goods. And as you said, the dopamine and all the lack of things that happen in our head. So how were we getting it before?
So from my opinion and research as well, it was connection. We were very family orientated, there was a lot of certainty, basically what happened in my parents' age was this is what you did. You went to school, you went to university, you get married, you have kids, you have a job that you're going to work 60 years in, then you retire, and it was connection. There was a sense of safety. There was a sense of security. People knew what was expected of them. There was definitely sort of tribal, connection where it's family and all of that. And there's real kind of evidence to show that the opposite of addiction is connection, which is the reason why we have fellowships and we have all of these other methodologies where tribal, it's all about community. And we lost that somewhere down the line. I mean, the world is not like it was 10 years ago. I have an 18-year-old son, and my life compared to his life and what he's exposed to and what I'm exposed to is like chalk and cheese. So, it's definitely a new world, a new era, a new kind of, I don't even know what to call it.
Existence.
But even us nowadays, we're still learning, as adults. We can't teach our children the same values that we had back. Well, maybe not values, that's the wrong word, but we're living in a different world now. So what I was taught, from my parents is not effective now because the world has changed. Marriage is not, it's not like it used to be. People are, they can be he, she, it, whatever the case is, they can identify as, different. There's so many different choices and there's so much uncertainty and there's so much unsafety that's going on. People are seeking that. They're seeking control. And what a lot of people don't understand about addiction, it's all about control, even though it's not. There's the sense of control. There's the sense of safety. It's a sense of, being okay that they seek. And that could be anything from exercise to substance to whatever. And again, like I said, we got to be mindful of not putting addiction into a box, because it is vast. So people, like with sex addiction, it's not really, it's all about dopamine, whatever, but it started out wanting connection, wanting intimacy. We're losing that with technology. COVID was massive. I mean, the addiction rate that went off, after COVID, like not before or not during, because everybody was just in survival mode. But the impact you see after COVID actually left, then the people started to realize, I'm in deep trouble here. Alcohol was, spiked, even though people couldn't get it. It went underground. The drugs have always been underground. People can still get it. These are the kinds of things that exacerbate it. It doesn't regulate it or try and stop it. It exacerbates it. So we are looking at addiction all wrong, in my opinion, and we're treating addiction all wrong. It is part of the human condition. And that's something that we all have to understand. At some point, you are going to find yourself in a situation where you're dependent on something. And that might be chemically, it might be emotionally, it might be physically, it might be spiritually dependent. And we got to navigate through that. And there's a way of doing that with a client without shaming, without creating more harm, without traumatizing individuals, which unfortunately is actually happening now. Yeah.
Sure. No, this is a very big topic. So people that's listening to this conversation and they realize that, they are stuck in a situation where they would like to get out of. How do they start this process? Because it took you years, and where does a person start? Do they start by talking to someone like you? Yeah.
Yes. Like I said, it's all about connection. And, with addiction, it's isolating. You withdraw, you become very, you separate yourself. I separate myself. And there's this belief that, oh, I'm unworthy, I'm undeserving, I'm not enough, all of that stuff that comes up. And then, we separate ourselves from our family, from our friends, because we're so in shame. And it becomes a secret, because we're not able to talk to anybody about it because we are full of shame. And addiction is rooted in shame. So, and then people start becoming their behavior changes and becomes very self-obsessive because it's a survival mechanism. It's a coping mechanism. Because now, we're supposed to act in a certain way. Society dictates that we've got to act in a certain way. But when that society, casts you out, so to speak, then what have you got? So you got to look for other things. So addiction is actually highly intelligent if you think about it, because it is a coping mechanism and it's a survival strategy, believe it or not, although it can kill you. The belief is that. But when you find somebody that you can actually connect to, that has no judgment, that does not judge you, that does not stigmatize you, that does not tell you what to do, but can actually just love you through that and, support you and hold you accountable in a loving, compassionate way, we find that far more effective than the punitive punishment that people get. Because we understand there's a reason why this behavior is playing out. There's a reason why. As you said, Mary, it's about pain. These people are in pain. They are struggling. They are disconnected from self. They are disconnected from, any spiritual kind of process or any kind of human being that they can relate to. So reconnecting with that, number one, you got to reconnect with somebody that can help you reconnect with yourself. And then we rebuild the self-esteem and the self-confidence, and we move out of shame. And once we've moved out of shame, then the real work starts. Because if
Yeah.
somebody's in shame, there is no learning that can take place. There's no kind of connection that can happen. So
Because
we've
that
got to work
shame,
with somebody out of shame first. Yes.
yeah, so shame is the lowest energy that a human vibrates.
Yeah. Yeah.
And
Exactly.
and it's the shame that leads to self-elimination, right?
Yes, yes, yes. So I believe addiction is a systemic illness. It's not just about the individual. You know, I work as a recovery coach, work very much in the biopsychosocial model, because I understand the influence that the environment has on somebody, and also what the individual's influence on the environment has. So it's a systemic issue. And if we can treat the whole system in the systems that the person finds themselves in, that is what I call sustainable recovery. It's not just the issue of an individual. As I said, most of the people affected by addiction come from adverse childhood experiences, traumatic, injuries, mental health issues, brain injuries, all of these things that can contribute to the process. So we have to look at it in a very kind of holistic manner in order for any real recovery to take place.
Nikki, we're slowly running out of time, but I have a quick question, if I may, and I think just to wrap up, and perhaps we'll get you back for another edition of the Coaching Hour. By your own admission, you were an addict. You were addicted to alcohol and then moved into drugs many years ago, and that all changed, you said, in your late 20s when you came to the realization that something had to change. What did you, if anything, replace your addiction with?
Okay, great question. So first of all, I just want to say I don't identify as an addict. I hate that word. It really doesn't ring well with me. I don't call people addicts. I believe that they go through a period of addiction or illness or disorder, but I don't call people addicts. It doesn't sit well with me.
Not
But
even when they are addicted. So while you were addicted, you didn't refer to yourself, or you wouldn't refer to yourself as an addict.
no,
Okay, fair enough.
yeah, I
Cool.
don't think it's helpful.
Yep. Yeah, we
But some
become
people
what we
find
tell
it helpful.
ourselves we are. So yeah,
Yeah.
100%. The more you
Yeah,
tell
we're
yourself I
human.
am an addict, the more you'll be one.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. I'm a human being going through adverse experience. I'm just human and I'm trying to navigate, through this. So I just wanted to highlight that. But what really helped me is, yes, it's definitely treatment. Yes, it helps when you have a community that can, support you and build you up, because you are so much, or I was so much in shame, and there was so much stigma around it, and there was so much guilt, and I couldn't think straight. Having a community of people and like-minded people around you who understand and can be compassionate was basically the turning point. I went to 6 different rehabs, from the high-end, very wealthy, to the bottom-end government, shelters. I went through them all, and I took away something from each. But it wasn't the treatment center. It wasn't the program that got me out of my substance use or my addiction. It was the reconnection.
Connection.
It was the connection to self. I realized that I wasn't a bad person. I realized that I was worthy. I realized that I was enough. And when I realized that, I started to transform and change, because I realized I was actually worthy of recovery, and I actually do have a place in this world, and that there are people that love me, and that and I began to start loving myself. So that substance use disorder burned out, if that makes sense. It no longer had any kind of power over me. I didn't need it anymore. I didn't need the alcohol. I didn't need the drugs anymore,
That's it.
to show up in the world. And I still show up messy, and I still, make mistakes, and it's still imperfect, and I still struggle with my mental health, episodes of depression and anxiety. Everybody does these days. I'm not alone anymore. I don't feel alone anymore. And And because of that, I think I don't even need it. It doesn't even come into my peripheral. It's not like even in my worst times, and I just been through burnout recently, it was brutal. There was not an inkling for me to, oh, let me pick up a drink or let me just find something that's going to be, to help me self-soothe, because I built myself up through that. Not only community, but spiritual connection is really important. Whatever that looks like for you, it doesn't matter. You know what I mean? I also obviously have my son. That was a real motivator for me, although it's not the be and end all, but it is a very, to have something,
Contribution.
it's a big contribution. But also understanding that, we're all in this messy world together and we're all struggling, and, we can do this together. That was a huge thing. So, for anybody out there who's struggling with addiction, substance use disorder or mental health, it's like, really, there are people out there who can help you and support you. You're not alone in it, because that's the belief, is that I'm alone and nobody understands, but it's not like that at all. So yeah, treatment definitely if you need it, but you don't have to go into a treatment center. Many people don't have to go. They can't afford it because it's very expensive. They're not on medical aid, but there are resources out there that people can turn to. It's not the only way. If you don't like fellowships, it's okay. Get a recovery coach. I'm a recovery coach. I support people who don't, the 12 steps never work for them. It's okay. You don't have to do that. There are other ways of recovering. Holistically, exercise, all of these things play a really important part of the recovery process. So the idea is to actually figure out what's going to work for you. Find somebody or a community that can endorse that and support that and lift you up in that. And then the process of self-discovery starts, where you're able to kind of explore your inner world, your emotional landscape, you understanding the brain and the nervous system. Where do your spiritual beliefs lie? All of that. And then you start growing up, and it kind of just organically works itself out. I don't know if I'm
It's
making
also
sense.
a wake up, not just a
Yeah.
What did you say now? You said something. You grow up. You also wake up.
Yeah, it's a wake up. Yeah, you wake up from your denial, it's a wake up. And, we all have that. And when some people wake up, it might take a couple of months, it might take a year or two before they actually get into a recovery process. But you can't deny that they've woken up. So once they wake up, okay, now what do we do? Where do we go from here? And this is another thing about coaching, recovery coaching, is that we don't go into the past. Yes, it's important for therapists and all of that to go and delve into the past and to, work on your trauma, etc. But it's really about, okay, this is where we are now. You know what I mean? All right, so you've relapsed 5 times. You're still here. You've survived it. Great. Okay, what do we do from here? How do we move forward? How do we start creating a life that you don't need to escape from? How do you create a life where you don't need to, self-soothe or self-medicate because your emotions are intense? How do you build resilience within yourself to be able to show up in a very difficult world with uncertainty and unsafety? These are the tools that really need to be taught.
Nikki, I've really enjoyed your energy today, and I'm sure I speak on behalf of everybody who's been watching and listening. So thank you very, very much for joining us. We're going to leave it there for now. I'm certain that we will get questions. If you do have questions, please pop them in the comments. And Marika, I think this is definitely a topic that can be continued. I'm sure you'll agree.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Wonderful.
Right.
But Nikki, thank you
you
for joining us for this episode of the Coaching Hour podcast. And or Marika at least, will be putting all of your contact details and information in the description for this. So I look forward to your company at some point again in the future. Thanks for being a great bundle of energy today. You've been going off like a firecracker. We've really enjoyed it. Thank you. We'll join you in another one soon. Bye for now.